Hey Dan, how you doing, man? You all right?
Very good. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. Thanks for asking. Basically, I wanted to have a quick chat with you because you've got a few things going on. I feel pretty much always, really. Let's be honest. But
Yeah.
one of the more interesting things I find is that I hope you don't mind me saying you're actually a lot younger than I think people realize because you've been involved in especially from like the UK scene for what feels like forever. But you're
Yeah.
still what 34 now, I think.
Spot on. You've done your homework.
Yeah, so I mean, for a lot of people like just coming into the sport, I think they'll know you best as obviously if your Polaris commentary work and for a few other events and
Mm.
sort of your social media presence, that sort of
Mm.
thing. But if I could take a step back to when you first sort of got involved with Jiu-Jitsu, I know you were maybe by today's standards, not that young, but at the time, like early 2000s, I think you started when you were like under 16, weren't you?
Yeah, I was about 14, 15. So I'm coming up on 20 years this year. Around about there.
So when you first got into the sport, then how did that come about? Because at the time, obviously, kids classes kind of weren't really a thing in most places.
Yeah, you're spot on. Yeah, there were no kids classes. Yeah, so I started probably 2005. And yeah, there were no kids classes. Look, I got into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in an interesting way, which is I joined the Japanese Jiu-Jitsu gym, which was Mill Hill Jiu-Jitsu Club. And at the time, the one of the instructors there was a guy called Nick Brooks. And Nick, at the time of me joining, who was a black belt, like third degree black belt in Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, but a couple of years prior had found Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and was a blue belt under Roger. So he was at that point already like, if you've ever trained Japanese Jiu-Jitsu and then you start Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, just like if you train any traditional martial art and then you start Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you go, what have I been wasting my time with? And you immediately quit doing all of the other stuff and you just focus on doing the stuff that really works. And that's pretty much what Nick was doing at the time. So him and a guy called Chris Hearn, who was another one of my very earliest instructors, were two blue belts at the time. And whilst we were doing blocks and throws and punches to the neck, they were in the corner rolling about. And basically, long story short, eventually the other instructor left and Nick took over the club. For a while, he made it a quote unquote hybrid, bit Japanese Jiu Jitsu, bit of Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. And then eventually one day he turned it to full Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. So, yeah, I was training with adults from the get go, which was fun. And I was not just the youngest there, but I was smallest there as well. I was 50 kilos when I started. I was a small, skinny kid. So yeah, that was. You're right though. There were really not a lot of kids classes, and the first few tournaments that I did, there were no juvenile divisions. I was competing as adults. The only juvenile divisions I ever did were IBJJF. I did Europeans at juvenile, and I did the worlds at juvenile, and everything else was adult.
So I mean, that kind of prepared you, I think, you know what I'm saying, for your sort of like early success in the sport quite well. Because I think really by today's standards, when you see purple belts, brown belts winning ADCC trials, it's
Mm.
still not really that common. I mean, it happens probably once or twice every year, but that's not
Mm.
a massive amount of people. Whereas back when you won it, which was what 2010 or 11, I think.
11, yep.
Yeah, that was pretty much unheard of at the time because everyone doing it was like an elite competitor, really, by today's standards, you know?
Yeah, yes, to a degree. I mean, I do believe that I was the first Brit to qualify to win European trials, I believe. But yeah, so I was a purple belt at the time, but there wasn't as many black belts around. There weren't as many as brown belts around. It was a very, very different scene to today. And a purple belt, a lot of purple belts today are black belt standards by 10 years ago or whatever, 15 years ago. And so yeah, it was yeah, that was a good day. Yeah.
So I could have asked as well, because that's one thing I think is quite depends on how you look at it. You might think of it as a good thing or a bad thing, but obviously the ADCC you qualified for happens to just be in Nottingham. So I mean it's not a million miles away. Whereas fast forward to today and athletes from
Yeah.
UK to win it, they're flying out to Vegas or even in between now and then. I mean, you have events in like Barcelona, that sort of thing. So how did you find that sort of competing on home soil but not really going that far?
Yeah, you know what? I've never made my mind up about whether I was happy that that was the luck of the draw or not. Yeah, every it's the only ADCC that has ever taken place in the UK. It will probably forever be the only ADCC that has ever taken place in the UK. I can't imagine them coming back anytime soon anyway. It seems firmly locked into the States for the time being, and for a good reason. So yeah, I remember I won my all expenses paid trip to Nottingham. So they offered to pay for my train or petrol, and it's like a 1.5, 2 hour drive from me. So, but on the other hand, it meant that I had a huge support there, and my friends could come and watch. So realistically, yeah, I'm probably happy that it was in Nottingham, because I could have everyone there, and even though it didn't go the way that I wanted, it was still a great experience.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like you said, back in those days, there was nobody from the UK at ADCC. It just didn't, it wasn't a thing really. I mean, I think the time that you won trials had only even existed for what, like 7 or 8 years or something like that. It really wasn't that long.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you kind of, when they were traveling around a lot, you would get lucky if you were the host country. They would basically use local competitors for backup fighters if they didn't make weight, or if they failed their medicals or whatever. So we ended up having like quite a few of the top level Brits at that 2011 event, which was cool. It's good to see everyone else on the stage, but yeah, it was a very cool experience for sure.
And you obviously never managed to return since then. I know you have had to go to trials a couple of times since then, though, haven't you? And what would you say was the difference from that sort of like initial run in 2011 to the one since then?
Yeah, so I qualified in 2011, and then in 20, I want to say, must have been 2015. I must have not done trials the next trials. And then the one after that, I did trials and I blew my knee out in the second round, in the overtime to the eventual winner of that division in the 88 kilo division. So that I was sort of unlucky. And then I like missed a few trials because of different dates for stuff. Like I wanted to do the trials in 2021, and I tore my pec like a couple of weeks beforehand. There was like loads of reasons that I just never ended up getting back out there. I did two more trials. That one that I blew my knee out, and then the other one I did under 99, when I weighed in at like 91 on the day, and I was like, this is just stupid. Like, what am I doing here? So that definitely wasn't my smartest move, but um, yeah, jiu-jitsu's come a long way since 2011. There's no doubt about that. It's a very, very, I mean, even just in terms of sheer size of the divisions now. Some of these divisions you have to win 6 or 7 matches to qualify. So it becomes more of a test of or as much of a test of endurance and a little bit of luck of the draw. But you got to have it all. You got to be on, you got to have the skill, and you got to have the cardio and the endurance, or be good at subs and get them really quick to get yourself to the final being somewhat fresh.
That's one thing you mentioned that I think is quite interesting as well, because a big part of what I've seen of you has obviously been really sort of focused on like the strength and conditioning side of jiu-jitsu. And since you first won trials, I think you were at 77, didn't you,
That's right.
originally? And then since then, obviously, you've gone up in weight quite a lot over the years, but gone up in size, if you know what I mean. Like you are a lot bigger than you were back then. Do you find that you have then, sort of on a personal level, do you find that you feel better at that heavier weight class, or do you sort of feel yourself better when you were that little bit lighter then?
Yeah, like it's hard to say. I was 20 when I won trials. And I was, just above 77. And do you know what? After the world in Nottingham, I was in the bar with all of the fighters there, and I was just looking around at them. I was like, I don't fit in here. Like I look like a different species to all of these people here. I'm just like a skinny British kid, and everyone else here is just like huge, massive jack guys. Now at the time, I guess I didn't really clock that these guys were all, or a lot of these guys anyway, were getting a little bit of help, let's say. So at that point, I thought I want to try and get a bit bigger. My help was a lot of chocolate milk which made me quite ill and quite bloated and sort of, I put on weight pretty fast, but it wasn't particularly good weight. So then as soon as I had a tournament coming up, I'd like clean up my diet and I'd lose all the weight again. But over the years, I really focused on my strength and conditioning work and got to, you know, I've been walking around about 90 kilos for, I don't know, 10 years now. Or maybe a little bit more than that even. And in terms of whether I feel better at that weight, yeah, I could not imagine being 77 kilos. Now that's like even 80 kilos. I just couldn't imagine being that size. It just, I find it so much nicer. Now, would I be a better grappler if I was 80 kilos? Yeah, maybe. There's a really good chance. There's a reason people cut weight. But you know, how much time do you spend grappling versus how much time do you spend in the rest of life? And I like being big and strong. It's a better way to live. Yeah.
No, it makes sense. I mean, like I said, you made it, I think, a big part of your sort of like presence in the sport has been to advocate for like strength and conditioning for a long time now, where I think the sports generally had quite an amateur approach to it for years, really. And it's only the last couple of years that you're seeing people really like dial in their strength and conditioning and becoming real athletes. Whereas, you know, early 2000s, 2010s, a lot of people were just doing it so casually, the strength and conditioning side of it, rather than having like a strict regimen. And can I ask, because a lot of people would say what you do is quite unconventional. Would you recommend that same sort of approach for, you know, any grappler out there, or is that just something that you personally find interesting?
Yeah, so there's a few things here. I'll tell you something interesting to begin with. Like, there was a reason why I lent into the strength and conditioning stuff so heavily. So in 2012, I was a brown belt. I was like starting to have, obviously I'd done ADCC trials. I'd competed at ADCC and won trials the previous year. And I was like on a roll. I was winning a lot of stuff. And I had a really bad back injury. So this is like, I'm like up and coming. I'm on a good trajectory. And I get a really bad back injury. And it's something that I battle with for years. But long story short, it puts me in a position where I actually couldn't roll that much. You know, I couldn't do 4 hours on the mat every day because my back just would not do it. And I wanted to compete with people who were doing 4 hours and 5 hours, six, you know, the Meow brothers they're on the mat 9 hours a day and sleeping in between. And I wanted to compete with people who were really rolling a lot. And if I couldn't compete with them on a amount of time that I train, I was like, I've got to find something else. I've got to get an edge somehow. And the thing that I could do that was a bit more controlled is that I could get stronger in the lifts that I could do. There were a lot of lifts that I couldn't do, but in the lifts that I could do, I could get stronger in. So that was really the main reason why I initially lent so heavily into the strength and conditioning stuff, is because I saw it as the only opportunity that I had to give myself some sort of advantage, because I couldn't out jiu-jitsu train these people. And then a lot of my inspiration from the strength and conditioning stuff came from, I guess, like old school strongmen was always a fascination of mine. Like, I'm fascinated by a lot of historical stuff and all of that. And I guess the big difference between when people hear the word strongman, they think of Eddie Hall, they think of Hafthor Bjornsson, they think of Brian Shaw, and they think of these like 200-kilo guys deadlifting 500 kilos and pulling trucks and stuff. And what a lot of people don't realize is that the strongman was like an occupation 150 years ago, and they were performing strongmen. So these were people who were, before the strength world sort of got commercialized, and a lot of these old time strongmen did go down that route. They would sell courses and programs and equipment and stuff like that. But they were performing strongmen. So they would go to theaters and they would perform shows where they would perform feats of strength. They would lift people, they would, you know, break chains, they would do all of these different crazy things. And that was entertainment, you know, before TVs were really around or the movies or anything like that. But the interesting thing with a lot of these old time strongmen is that they were also wrestlers. So I felt like there was a big connection. Not only did I just think that these guys were just so damn cool, and all of these individuals were pre-steroids, right?
Yeah.
Like you're seeing sort of the pinnacle of health and fitness and strength, and you know, with this thought of wrestling and grappling as well, without all of the steroids that we have that we've had in the world since. So they were really the big inspiration for me, and that's why a lot of the training that I have done over the years has maybe seen unorthodox. Some of the unorthodox stuff is just stuff that, you know, was the most orthodox thing to do 100 years ago. And you know, I've gone through phases. I've gone through phases of doing stuff that is very much powerlifting, stuff that is like modern day strongman stuff, stones and log and, you know, sleds and all of that stuff, car pulling, and then mixed in with all of my own stuff as well. So the longer I've spent inside of this world, because I've been strength training for a really long time now, and because of the way that I work personally, I'm always looking and thinking of ways to, you know, thinking outside of the box, to try and get the results that I want to get. And yeah, it's always funny. People, you know, they say it's unorthodox, and I like, for me, like a pec deck is unorthodox. You know, this is crazy to me. None of it makes sense to me. Whereas lifting a stone or a sandbag is as orthodox as it gets. So what's conventional and what's unconventional is certainly a matter of relativity.
That's a good point as well, because especially when you mention like lifting a sandbag or a rock, that's probably the best way I can think to replicate lifting a person as well. Like if you haven't got training partners heavier than you available all day and night, like realistically, that's the only way you can replicate that sort of unbalanced like body weight distribution. You know what I mean? When you're trying to lift someone and they're moving in different directions, trying to counter that, the sandbag sort of naturally does a similar thing, where obviously it's leaning to one side or it's falling at the other side or whatever. So it actually replicates that better than, like you said, like deadlifting, where the weight is static and it just goes up and back down again.
Yeah, 100%. And look, there's nothing wrong with deadlifting. There's nothing wrong with barbells. People, and maybe this is where I've gone wrong. I haven't become too dogmatic about anything. And if you don't get really dogmatic about something, you can't really sell anything because you're not demonizing everything else. So all the best salesmen, it's their thing works and everything else is crap. Unfortunately, I just can't, you know, I can't compromise on my beliefs for a little extra cash. Sometimes I wish I could. But for me, all of these things are just tools. A barbell is a tool, a dumbbell is a tool, a kettlebell's a tool, a sandbag's a tool, a stone's a tool, you know, a pull-up bar, rings, all of these different things. They are just tools to train attributes of strength. And in terms of like the sandbag being sort of quote unquote more realistic for lifting a person, you have to be careful about going too far down the route of trying to replicate movements from sport and seeing strength as a more general attribute to build. But at the same time, you can look at, there's a balance to be struck where, you know what, if you were a grappler, sandbags are a really good tool, you know, because sandbags, it's not even just sort of, yes, you've got that little off balance and stuff like that. But for me, the beauty of sandbags is that you use this compressive force. You're pulling it in with everything in order to manipulate it at all times, right? And that is something that transfers over. That movement of squeezing in, compressing, that crosses over to grappling, standing, and on the ground. So I think for grapplers especially, I think everyone can really gain a particular type of strength. And some people get really, you know, oh, strength is strength. But like, no, you know, if you're used to picking up, you see these guys who can pick up some big, massive stones, they are just not going to feel weak in any position. Whereas I have seen some people who are like pretty strong in the gym and it doesn't cross over as well. But if someone's picking up like a 200-kilo stone, I'd be worried about them.
Well, I think you see that a lot as well, where when you, especially here in the UK, obviously it's pretty common that you feel like rugby, you know, not even really high level people, but just people that have played rugby their whole life and they jump into jiu-jitsu like mid-20s or something.
Mm-hmm.
The way they feel when they roll in is often so much stronger than someone who's spent 10 years just lifting weights, because even though, obviously they'll probably do that strength and
Yep.
conditioning and general weight training as well, they've just spent years and years throwing people around, tackling people, and that's transfers over not just look at a skill level, but I think also at, like you said, like that compressive strength, holding people and like pulling them into you a lot. You know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. It's like rolling with a wrestler. And I know like a wrestler is a bit, there's a bit more crossover with actual grappling, but like it's not that different you get a rugby player who's been in the ruck all their life, they're going to have that strength. And yes, they're also doing a huge amount of strength and conditioning, just like wrestlers. They're used to grappling someone, even if it's a different style of grappling, it feels very, very different to someone who, even someone who's just done a lot of strength training. Yeah.
And then if we go back to your sort of like competitive career as
Mhm.
well, one thing you mentioned like in passing that I think will be quite interesting is you mentioned tearing your pec. Was that in the Gio Martinez match at Polaris, was it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So that obviously set you off trials that year, and you haven't really competed since then. Was that like an intentional thing, or was it unrelated to the injury and just sort of taking time away from it?
Yeah, so I tore look, it wasn't convenient for anyone, but COVID kind of hit at a really awkward time for me. I was 29 when COVID hit, and really like some real formative years in terms of competition. And then when I finally had an opportunity to compete again in 21, on Polaris, I injured myself and I had surgery, and it was a year out of competition. I competed again just over a year later at in 2022, November 22, Europeans, IBJJF Europeans, and that was the last time that I competed. And I guess that it just wasn't the priority that it once was. And I haven't competed since. That's not to say that I don't want to compete again. I do want to compete again. But when you've competed at a high level, it's not like I'm a hobbyist who's, having, chucking their hat in the ring, a purple belt at the whatever English Open, Masters 3, but whatever, not to undermine anyone who competes as a hobbyist. Is a great way to add other facets of that hobby. But for me, like to compete at an elite level again, you really have to be all in on competition, especially these days when you've got the level of competition just keeps on getting higher and higher. And I guess competing has just not been very high up my list of priorities for what I'm doing. Vis-a-vis, I haven't done it for a while.
So that makes sense as well. Obviously, like you said, at a higher level, the amount of preparation that goes into it obviously has to be more than, like you said, someone that just jumps in on the weekend kind of thing. But is it also a case that with that sort of like high level of competition, you also, I imagine, wouldn't want to just sort of go out there and compete against anyone? You know what I mean? Like obviously with your sort of like name value and I hesitate to say brands, that kind of thing. You obviously can get big name matchups. You know what I mean? So is that something that you would not so much wait for, but you would want to have like an interesting match proposed to you before you actually came back as well?
Look, to be honest with you, I think if I compete again anytime soon, look, I'm not training a huge amount. I mean, another thing, without getting too much into it, but another thing was like I stopped teaching just before COVID. COVID hit. I started training at another gym, and I've been at that gym ever since. And I spent years, and I kind of am half still looking, but I spent about 2 or 3 years like really, really looking to open my own gym, with the hope that like once I open a gym, then I can get back in the training twice a day or whatever. And it never came about. So that's another reason, is just like I don't have, for me to get the training in that I need to train, I'd be having to travel, an hour and a half in the London and back every day. And with other things being prioritized, it just wasn't how and you don't get paid for competing, so you spend a lot of money doing stuff and you're not really getting that massively compensated for it directly. So it's just something that I haven't done. If I was to compete this year, for example, I would probably just jump in. I've not competed for 3 years. I'd probably just jump into a local tournament and have a roll about. And then eventually, if I was feeling good or if I managed to get a little bit more training in, have a chat to Polaris and see if we can get an interesting match.
Nice, nice. And obviously with Polaris, like I mentioned right at the beginning, that's kind of where I think a lot of people will recognize you from, people that started in the last like couple of years.
Mhm.
Is obviously your commentary work through them. And can I ask, how did that come about? Because you originally obviously were competing for them before you started stepping behind the mic kind of thing.
Yep. Yeah, I still competed whilst I was doing commentary on various shows, but they just asked me to do it. I don't know how I did that. Yeah, I think it was. I can't remember the first. I have commentated for a long time. Over 10 years, maybe significantly over 10 years. So I think that my first commentary, which was for the Tough Invitational, in Essex, I believe it was, and that was. I can't remember whether I'd started doing the podcast already or not, but basically, whether it was just before or just after I'd been doing the podcast, I was just known as generally in the jiu-jitsu community as someone who was better well known and could talk. And that was basically it. So that got me into commentary to begin with. And then after a certain amount of time, Polaris asked me if I'd jump in. And I've been with them ever since. And then in 2020, I started working for Cage Warriors. And I've been with them ever since as well. And Cage Warriors, we do a lot more shows. So Polaris do 4 shows a year. Cage Warriors is like 12 or 15 shows a year. So I've done like 10 times more Cage Warriors in the last 5 years than I have Polaris in the last 10.
Nice. And obviously that's taking up quite a lot of your time as well. But like you sort of alluded to, you're someone that wears quite a lot of hats and does quite a few things at once. And what would you say is like your main sort of pursuit at the moment then?
So at the moment, I do generally what I've done over the last, let's say 5 years anyway, is a combination of commentary, touring for doing seminars and camps, and then working on some online stuff, some jiu-jitsu content, but mainly strength stuff. This is the first year in a long time, probably 7 or 8 or 9 years, that I'm not doing a seminar tour. I'm focusing a little bit more on the online stuff at the moment, trying to get that a little bit more self-sustaining. And then I'll probably go back to doing some seminars next year. If at any point I find a gym to open, then that would be another story. So yeah, at the moment, the main thing I'm focusing on is like working on a few different products and projects that some have come out and some that will be out in the near future.
Nice. And I know obviously that's focused, like you said, more on the strength and conditioning side of it. Are you sort of, you know what I'm asking, are you looking to branch out to like general strength and conditioning, or are you focusing more on grappling specifically?
So a lot of my stuff is not grappling specific. So like my 2 grip programs are sort of general. I would say like actually, even though sort of my most dedicated audience is still jiu-jitsu based, my audience in general the majority are not jiu-jitsu based anymore. Which was a strange transition, it was a bit unexpected, I guess. So yeah, a lot of the people do not train jiu-jitsu. So a lot of the projects that I'm working on, all of them will be beneficial for grapplers, because they're coming through my own training philosophy, which I built training for grappling. But it's not that different training for anything, training for another sport or training for life or just training to feel better. So less and less are they jiu-jitsu specific, but all still jiu-jitsu relevant.
Nice. And that's pretty much all we've got time for at the moment. But is there anything you want to say about what you've got coming up, or anything you're going to be releasing soon, or anything like that?
Sure. So yeah, the main thing I'm working on at the moment, I released a couple of months ago, like a sort of online community thing. So it's a monthly subscription, and I'm putting content out there on a regular basis, and it also comes through with a lot of the other products that I've already got. I just released a neck and spine health sort of mini course with a good friend of mine who's a very good strength conditioning coach, for everyone who's got neck and back issues, be that from jiu-jitsu, be that from typing on an office or whatever else. And the thing that I'm currently working on is like I started it thinking that it wasn't too big of a project, but it's turned out to be way, I talk a lot more on when I'm typing as well as when I'm talking. So it's ended up being a lot bigger and broader than I expected. But it sort of answers the question which people have been giving me for years, which is, how do I train? So I put out a few things that is just like, here are some grip training programs. But I'm currently working and building and just finishing off. It should be done within the next month, hopefully within even sooner. A a full body strength training framework that people can use, not a program. People always ask me for programs, and look, I can make a program, and I probably will make a program for different things, but they're not like, it's very difficult to make a program that's going to work for different people. And also you have a program, you run it for 8 weeks or 12 weeks or 16 weeks or whatever. You run it for 6 months. And at some point you're going to get bored of it, or you're going to get diminishing returns. And then what do you do? So this is not a program. This is a framework to teach you how to make a program that will suit all of your constraints, be that time, energy, recovery, equipment, and anything else that you want to do, your goals and whatever. So that's what I'm currently working on at the moment. All of that stuff can be found at apeacademyonline.com, and my Instagram is sort of the main place where everything goes out, which is at raspberry_ape.
Nice. That sounds like a really good idea as well for, like you said, both grapplers and individual people that don't compete in any kind of sport. Like, the ability to effectively work without a PT but have the same kind of like structure is definitely going to be valuable. And yeah,
100%.
thanks very much for your time, Dan, and have a nice evening. All right.
Thanks for having me on, mate. I'll catch you soon.
No worries. Take care.